planting in the Meadow House backyard, and you can see that we have created quite a number of beds here, quite large beds. And it's going to take a lot of plants to fill in space. But I went ahead and got a number of plugs, which I've covered on an earlier video all about plugs. So these are deep plugs or landscape plugs, so DPs or LPs. Went and got a number of native and I would say native adjacent plants. What I mean by that is native adjacent means that they're native to the US, but it's native maybe to a neighboring state or some state that might be a bit more in the Midwest or south of us. So these two right here are dahlias, not dahlias, but dahlias, D-A-L-E-A. And one is Candida, which is the white version. I think this one is the white version, yes, right here, which has, I think, a little bit more of a thicker leaf. And then this is the purpurea, which is the purple version. Both of these, as I had shared, are not native to New York, but they're native to adjacent states. When I look at leaves like this, it immediately makes me think it's a nitrogen fixer, and this is a nitrogen fixing plant.
Why? What tells you about them?
In the family of Fabaceae or clovers, just has that kind of clover-like leaf. You could see that it has the leaf and the leaflets, even in trees. So I'm thinking about like a locust, which is also in the Fabaceae family. It just reminds me of one of those plants that would be a nitrogen fixer. These don't get too high. Roughly around 2 feet tall is where they max out. And they kind of have like these beautiful like little cleaning brush style, almost like a plantain flower, but a bit showier. And I've planted quite a lot in those other gardens, which I'll show you and take you over, but I'm gonna plant some more in here. And because they're closer to around 2 feet, I'm gonna plant them a little bit more closer to the edge because a lot of these plants are in the 4 to 5 foot range and they'll kind of get lost within it, which is totally fine too, because I just want all of these plants to billow out and basically rub elbows with one another. But I also want to be able to see the flowers. And of course, if it's a nitrogen fixer, you can see that there's one here, it's a little dry, so I'm going to water these in. If it's a nitrogen fixer, even if you don't see it visibly, at least it's also doing something where it's fixing nitrogen for the other plants. So plugs are generally pretty much ready to go. You can see that these are well rooted. Eventually what I'm going to do is, after I plant all the plugs, I'm going to spread some seed, mainly like violet seeds, and a number of others that could be like a really good understory herbaceous plant. And if you recall, some of those violets serve as the host plant for our fritillary butterflies. It's kind of expensive to buy violets, so buying it by seed I feel like is the most economical option. But here you go, I have a bird's foot violet, which I think is really beautiful. Typically our violets will have a more cordate or heart-shaped leaf, and this one has a bit more that looks like fingers and has this little purple flower here. So I thought like that would be a beautiful plant for the understory of this relatively kind of big, it's like a hefty garden. You can't really see it now. I think we'll have to just exhibit patience and see this garden in full maturity maybe next spring, summer, and fall. I probably won't seed until another maybe couple weeks or so. So right now I'm doing this in August, and I would like to start seeding maybe in September when it's getting a little bit more towards fall. That way a lot of these plants will need some type of cold stratification, which just means that their seed needs to experience winter for it to successfully germinate, which seems counterintuitive, but in an area that has evolved with winter, a lot of our seeds need that just to kind of break the seed coat sometimes. Now I've planted these plants in our pollinator garden, and to be honest with you, I haven't seen them come up. So it'll be interesting to see them here. I mean, I didn't plant that many. So because I'm planting a lot more in here, I think it'll be more easily recognizable. The pollinator garden got really big really fast. All right, so I'll show you some of the other plants that I've been planting. This one is a type of aster, and this is called Symphyotrichum uletogens, something like that. It is one of our endangered varieties of aster. So it doesn't look like much, you know, I understand because they come in and they're kind of crushed and they don't have any flowers on, but I'll tell you what, these grow very fast. And this is, again, we have lots of asters here, very important plant in the fall, but I really wanted to focus, especially in this garden and a little bit in this garden, some of our endangered and threatened plants. And I have one of our liatrisses here, which is our Liatris scariosa variation newlandii, which is also an endangered plant. And so I've focused on planting that in here as well. So that's something that I wanted to keep top of mind. Here's another liatris. This is not one that's endangered. I actually don't even think that it's native to New York, so this might be native adjacent. And this one's Liatris cylindricae. The reason why I chose this one is a lot of our liatrices are quite tall, so they get pretty beefy, 3 feet, 4 feet, even 5 feet tall. This one is very modest in size. So I wanted this kind of for front of border, because again, if I plant it towards the middle, it'll get lost. But if I plant it a bit more front of border or in a garden such as this, you'll be able to see it a lot more. So I don't think this is a liatris that's coming up right now. So this one might be our variation newlandii that's coming up. So I have a couple plugs that I've plugged in here. And this one looks like it had flowered already. So it's nice that they're flowering at different times. I had chatted with somebody who basically collects native plant seeds. And the fact that they have germination at different times, slightly different times, actually is great, because if there is a pollinator or an insect that relies on it as a host plant, if that insect happens to emerge at a later time, because maybe the weather was less favorable or whatnot, then that's a positive thing. So having different germination rates is actually considered positive, not always blooming at once, essentially. And you'll notice I've planted a couple other plants, which I'll feature in a second. And basically, we've built up all of these beds. So we've added cardboard, and then we added some of the soil seconds that we got from Espoma. And essentially, these were bags of soil that maybe had been opened or whatever, and they couldn't sell. So we ended up taking them, and without that, we probably couldn't have built up all these beds. Now, look, I tried to pull this up by the leaves and I broke it off, but the corms should still be under there. So hopefully I'll plant this and it'll come up next year. But generally, these are fairly resilient plants if that happens. It may not have green in the first year, but maybe next year it'll come up. So it's probably better to put your finger down here, or if you have a chopstick or a stick, and just kind of push it up so that you're not pulling on the tops of those greens, because then you risk taking them out. Here's the corms. That's where they put all the sugars and the nutrients to grow back next year. All right, so this one is another kind of aster, but it's in a genus that I had never heard of. But this is Ionactis linearifolia. And this one seems to be quite hardy. It has a really thickened leaf. It makes me think about like the penstemon pinifolius, I think it is, the pine-leaved penstemon, and it's in like a more rocky environment. So I got this primarily for the gardens over there, which are facing the south. And so we'll take this 3 and plant it over there, and I'll show you what we've been planting over there as well. I went and planted a number of corms for the liatris, and it's just starting to come up. You can see that this one's starting to get a flower head on it, a flower stalk, and there's that one over there that is also getting a flower stalk. These are still kind of making their way up. And I started planting some of the smaller liatrices, which I just showed you, throughout here as well. And this will be another bed where we're really underplanting with violets. So again, I'll probably end up doing that in a couple weeks. Now here in the middle, I planted a lot of those dahlias. So that's the clovers that I talked about. And I planted some in here, as well as this one, which I've done all the planting of. So I can't show you, but it did come in plugs. And this is also a Symphyotrichum. This is also an aster. But look at that glaucous leaf, very pretty. It's called silky aster. So it's Symphyotrichum sericea. And that doesn't grow too high. Again, this bed, I wanted this fringe tree and this vitex to be kind of the big bushy plants in here, and I wanted some lower herbaceous plants. And you can see I've done a fairly good job with filling this up. So I'll have these last three that I'm gonna put in here. And again, this is all amended soil. So this is cardboard and just beautiful espoma raised bed mix or compost on top. So it's very easy to work with. I'll plant the other two down here. Now these are Egyptian walking onions coming up as well. I took these from the Memorial Garden and I planted them in here because they seem similar to the Stratoscontia ohioensis. And so I thought I like planting like plants together, but that are from completely different families or genera. So I thought I'd, try that out. And again, these asters won't get too big. But asters late in the season, really beautiful flowers, and they're in the Asteraceae family, and they are incredible for our pollinating insects. So that's what I'm doing here for now, and I'll tune back in like maybe 2 weeks, and we'll finish the underplanting here for the season. And then we'll have to wait for spring, summer, fall next year to see how these gardens fill out. All right, folks, so we're here at the Meadow House, and we are starting to underplant the gardens here. It's funny, every time I come out, there's always like a little plant that has popped out, like this one right here, and eaten. So one of the things is we've built up all of this soil with some of Espoma's seconds, like the soil that they couldn't sell anymore. And so it's very soft and pliable. So oftentimes we'll get like a skunk or a raccoon, and they'll come in here, and in the morning I'll see like a plant that is pulled up. But anyway, I have a number of plants that are still coming in that I'm going to be planting into these gardens. And this is going to be the last hurrah for planting this year in the fall. And you can see that this bed is pretty much planted up, but as you probably saw from a couple of my other videos, I've been wanting to underplant this with violas, which are our native violets, and I have a number of them here from Prairie Moon Nursery. I have the common blue violet, the bicolored form violet, I have the cream violet, I also have some yellow violets in here. There you go, you can see that. And you'll see on here refrigerated seed. And what that means is when you get these, if you don't plant them right away, you need to refrigerate them. And these are the types of seeds that if you don't refrigerate them, they're pretty much not viable anymore. So once I got these in the mail, I put them right back into the refrigerator because I wasn't ready to plant them. And hopefully today, and what we'll find out maybe next year is, were they viable? Are they coming up? And my hope is that when I underplant with violas, that the violas will eventually move into the regular lawn. And I've had some folks write in and say, oh, I never really liked violas. I was always taking them out of my lawn, but here at least, and I know in a number of other places, they serve as the host plant for our fritillary butterflies. And that's important because I've talked about different host plants for butterflies and moths, specifically the caterpillars in their larval stage. That's something that we'd like to actually promote here in our gardens. So you can see, this is what the seeds look like. They're quite small, nothing like sedge seed or anything like that where it's just basically dust. But what I'm going to do is drop them into this pail of sand. And the reason for that is when I start to spread the violas, I want to see where I've spread it. And the sand helps to disperse the seed as well as allows you to see where you've dropped it into the soil. So that's what I'm going to be doing today here. And then if you stick with me, I'll share with you some of the other plants that I've decided to plant in some of these beds, because some of these beds are a little bit weedier than others, and I want to kind of get them planted in with certain plants so that I don't have to deal with the weeds. And my hope is that if I plant a lot of plants and plant densely, that it's going to suppress them. Here we go. You can see the seeds. Now I just dropped one in the lawn here, but you can see these seeds are a little tanner by nature than the ones that I just put in there, and those are the yellow violets. Let's see what the purple ones look like. Oh, this is the bird's foot violet. So this is Viola pedata, and I have planted that one. That's that one right there. So you can see actually what it looks like. I think those are really beautiful because typically, you know, the viola leaves are cordate. They're a little more heart-shaped. And this one has one that's called, it's called bird's foot violet because the leaves kind of look a bit more like bird's feet. So this is quite tiny, you could see, and they have this caramel color. Yeah, those look pretty similar to the ones that I had shared before. A bit browner, kind of that taupey color. Yeah, so that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna open up all these, mix it around, and then toss them into here, and then I'll be planting some other plants up as well. I have all the violets in here. You can see I haven't mixed them up yet. I wanted to try to buy them in bulk, but they didn't have them in bulk, so I had to buy them package by package. But there's about 50 seeds per package in there, which is not bad because violets tend to be pretty good seeders. What I'm gonna do now is just toss it in, and some may land on the leaves of the plants, and some may go into the grass, but that's okay because my ultimate goal is just to get an understory in this garden bed. But mind you, I've just planted these plants in June. Nothing looked like this. I just planted these plants probably like 4 or 5 months ago. And so each of these plants are probably gonna get a lot larger. They'll start to shade the rest of the ground out. But some of the violets really like to be in shade. So that's a plus. Now here's some of the bird's foot violet. So you can see that's actually out now. And normally these will flower in the springtime, but it's not unusual for violets to bloom again in the fall. All right, so I have some left over. So what I'm gonna do is start in this bed. And I already know that this bed is going to be a bit of a problem for me. The one thing that we did in here that we didn't do in a lot of the other beds is that when we started to edge, we took the edge and we turned it around, and then we put cardboard on top. And I shared this in an earlier video when I talked about it, but I might as well mention it again here. The challenge with that is that there's roots still living in that soil, and even though you turn it around, I didn't plant right into it, I put cardboard over it. But if you don't get a perfect edge, then when you flip it around, it's a little bumpy. You put the cardboard over that, and because it's bumpy, the cardboard doesn't really sit flat to the ground, and the grass starts to come right back up. So you can see this is all grass. Like, this needs to be pulled out, and if you don't get all the little white roots, then it's just gonna constantly come back. So it is a bit of a problem in this bed, which is why I wanna get some more plants planted in here, because the denser you plant, the less likely you're gonna have to deal with the grass, or you're not gonna even see the grass. But over here you can see it's a lot of dandelions that moved in, a lot of the lawn grass from underneath. I'm just gonna seed these violets. So I'm gonna do one last fertilize in this whole bed, and my plan is to get all of these in here. This is Amsonia hubrichtii. This is not a native plant, but it's native to the United States, and it's an incredible plant. You may remember that I planted this in the 4-season garden that's up towards the common house, and they get about hip high eventually. It takes about 3 years for them to get that. And in the early springtime, they get these beautiful, tiny little baby blue, sky blue flowers, and they get this wispy kind of leaf that looks very similar to Vernonia, which this is an ironweed. This is a cultivated variety. So our native Vernonia gets very, very tall. I mean, like 5, 6, 7 feet tall. This one is more like 36 inches, 3 feet tall. I wanted to get big bushy plants that have like very similar leaves. And the Amsonia, when it's not in bloom, actually looks a lot like the Vernonia. The Amsonia blooms early in the season, like in spring. The Vernonia, you can see it's just starting to bloom now. And again, this is a young plant, so it's not that impressive. So you have different blooming times. And then the Amsonia, when it gets towards the fall, gets these bright yellow butterscotch color leaves. So it's got that interest kind of all season long. But again, it takes about, I would say, 2 to 3 years for it to get any sort of height. I also got another grass, and this is an Andropogon tenarius. And this, again, this grass is not native, but it is native to the US, not too far from here. And the seed heads are just so beautiful. They get these like white, cottony seed heads on these dark red burgundy stems. And I've kind of gone all out with grass here, the Muhlenbergia and that one. And then also, these aren't looking so great, so I'm hoping they'll pull through. This is our native Deschampsia, but they do better in shade. Now, I kind of pre-planted them in here because I know I'm going to have a shady garden bed here with all of these trees, but the trees are small now. So I think and I hope that the Deschampsia will survive and kind of grow in with the bed. Instead of dropping this in every little hole, what I'll do is just do a little wash over the whole garden bed. We do have a lot of wild animals, and this smells a little ripe. So it will be interesting to see if there's any animals that kind of dig up in this bed. But I want to do one last fertilize, especially for those plugs, because you want to plug those in usually at least 4 weeks before you get frost. And typically, frost around here, maybe if you talked to us 25 years ago, the frost would happen in late September. Now, the frost is usually happening sometimes not until November. So I don't feel like fearful of planting those, but you want to get those roots established almost immediately. And it's been very rainy here, very overcast. This is the first day that's actually partially sunny. These are well watered because they've been sitting outside. So you can see they're really well watered. That's what the roots look like. And these are deep plugs, DPs, or landscape plugs, LPs. And that's what you typically want in a situation like this. They'll just establish, all these roots are like ready to go. So these are liatris. That's right there. It doesn't look like much. I mean, it looks like this is pretty dried out, but this is a grass. See that? So these are the issues that I have here, because a lot of the liatris actually looks like a grass. And if you don't get these little white roots, like this one, I didn't get the right root, it's just gonna come back. So this is a beauty berry back here. It looks like some of it got eaten by a deer. Deer kind of tasted that. So I gotta be careful about that too. But these Amsonias are actually in the family of Apocynaceae. And if you are familiar with that family, it is the milkweed family. So they usually have a type of latex in them that deer do not like. So this is a plant that's going to, once it's big, it's going to protect the other plants around it, and it's going to protect itself because it has that nasty latex that the deer don't want to munch on, or any other animal for that matter. You don't want to plant these too close together because they get quite large. It's very tempting. Okay, I'm going to plant some of these Andropogons. I'm going to plant them kind of in the middle because these get quite large. And you'll see that I have some of the Muhlenbergia here planted, this stuff, this wispy stuff. I did have some extra plugs that I brought in, and I planted that, pretty much here. They're a little lower and more wispy than these. So that way you could see through the Muhlenbergia and you'll be able to see this grass. And I have other types of liatris planted in here. So you can see the liatris, and I have a number of different Symphyotrichums, which are our native asters, planted in here, although some of these asters are cultivated varieties, so they grow a little lower to the ground. I can't remember how tall this gets, but it's at least 3 feet, and it can get quite beefy too. And typically what I do in the really early springtime is that I'll just cut the grass back pretty much to the ground, you know, a few inches up. And that way all the old leaves kind of go away and it starts to look fresh again. This is gonna be a little too close to this tree because this tree is going to get quite large. So I'm gonna maybe put it up here. This one will also get large, but it's gonna take a little while and it has a completely different canopy. So I'm gonna plant this closer to this liatris and this Symphyotrichum here. And that way, if people are looking up from the road, they'll be able to see the tulips, which I haven't planted yet, then the Muhlenbergia, the wispiness in the Muhlenbergia, the liatris, and then this grass, and then of course the canopy of the trees. So we'll try this out. I think Andropogon would do really well in the meadow as well, but I didn't choose to plant it in there because it's not really a native grass to this area. So I thought maybe I'll just save it for the garden beds. All right, let me take you through the last plant that we'll be planting in here, at least for today. Totally forgot. I have 2 more plants. We have lots of lobelia that are growing in the landscape. Lobelia cardinalis, it's also a great hummingbird plant. Recently featured that. Lobelia sulfitica, which is also growing in some of our gardens and around Half Lake, which is also a great hummingbird plant. I found Lobelia inflata, which is an intense herbal. And then I thought, well, let's do the pale spiked lobelia, which is Lobelia spicata. And this grows to be about 2 feet tall. And I wanted to plant it in here because we have a lot of very kind of candelabra shaped flowers in here. We have some digitalis, which is our foxglove. So I can't wait to see what this garden is gonna look like in 1 to 2 years from now. And these, of course, don't look like much. You see this little basil rosette. But as you could see from this, it'll get this really tall, wispy white spike. So I thought, let's try that out. And then this does like a pretty medium wet habitat to basically medium dry. So it's not always necessarily wet. So I would like to actually plant, I have 6 of these. You can see I only have 4 here. But I'm going to plant 2 up towards Half Lake and see if it would establish around there with the other lobelias. And I like to plant plants in different places because if I ever happen to lose one or if an animal digs it up, well then you know what, I have some others on the side. But I'm going to just give it a little bit of fertilizer just to help establish those roots really quickly. And it's a good move that if you're not going to get rain soon, which we're going to get it tomorrow, but it's a good move to also water them in. I'm not going to remember what these plants are until they start flowering again. I mean, it's a pretty diverse bed already. Soil is so soft and easy to work with, unlike some of our native soils here. So it's a pleasure to actually be able to plant this. You can see some echinacea right here. I don't know if that's going to flower, but it looks like it is. And because these are 2 feet tall, I'm kind of planting them a bit like back from here because this is about the height of these. So I have the shorter plants in the front and it kind of gets to the higher in the back. So that's why I'm kind of just working my way around this area here. Okay. All right, so second to last plant is a special one. This is Salvia lyrata. This is one of our native salvias, and I can't recall if this is threatened or endangered. I think it's threatened in our state, and whenever I see growers growing a rare, threatened, endangered, or even an extirpated, which means essentially it's extinct, plant that used to be in New York, even if it wasn't from this county, it's one of those plants that I usually try to seek out and plant here. I know some folks really focus on bioregional plants, but we can't always get that lucky of finding seeds. And my sentiment is I'd rather try to reestablish it here from the beginning and as quickly as possible and see if we could up the population levels of that plant. So Salvia lyrata doesn't grow that tall. This is pretty much maybe the height that it is. It's already flowered for this year, so it already had gone to seed. And I figured this is going to be a really nice bed to plant it in because this bed is quite small. Eventually this birch and this spruce is going to kind of take over, and then kind of the sub-canopy layers, if the deer stop eating them, will be these rose bushes. And then I have a little bit more of these herbaceous plants around here. So I have some dianthus, which you could see is in bloom. There's one that's in bloom right here, that dark burgundy red bloom. And then this is the achillea, which you can see has gone to seed, and this is moonshine. So yeah, I figured this would be a nice little plant to plant in here and see how it goes. This is a bed that animals like to dig in, so I'm constantly fighting with them and coming down in the morning and seeing that like there might be a plant that's been dug up. But again, once their roots established, by next year, I don't think many animals will be digging them up. See, I don't want to plant too close to the roses because I'm afraid if I do that, the rose will eventually take over the plant. And this is meant to be kind of a low growing bush. But this is kind of Rosa Scotch Pink. And actually, I should probably give them, and I will likely give them some rose tone before the fall is out, just to give them a nice boost of roots. And then I'll come up here and mulch them very well for the winter months as well. So this is a Cupid's dart, really pretty dried seed head you could see. And then we have the moonshine, then you have some viola right here. So already this diversity of planting, and you can see that I don't shy away from planting plants that are a little bit closer together. This is scabiosa, great plant that basically blooms from May to almost November if you're lucky. So I love these plants, and the butterflies and the bees tend to love them too. All right, that's gonna be it for now. I'm going to plant the rest of those Amsonias in there, try to get some of that weeding done, and then we'll continue on with some of the gardens here at the Meadow House and beyond at Flock.
We'll be sharing how the gardens and wildscaped areas mature as the seasons progress, so if you enjoy videos like this, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notifications button to help us grow and share these videos to more folks. In the meantime, we'll be cracking away at more of the gardens and renovations here at Flock. We'll see you in the next video.